From Lucifer.
Well,
what we're really talking about here is Lucifer, the fallen angel, and they have picked up on this, the Illuminati. And if you take a look at some of the Chevys, now they're called the Illumin, and they have the horns going up in the back of the vehicle, very subtly telling us that something is coming down by the year 2000. It's from Lucifer. They want it all. They want to enslave your child, your wife, your mother. There isn't anything that you ever had. There isn't anything that you own. There isn't any right that you possess that they're not planning on taking away.
This is, folks.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
That's right.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
That's right.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
That's right.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
That's right.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
That's right.
The privately owned Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's private.
Just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Vyzygoth's Grassy Knoll continues.
Welcome to another segment of Beyond the Grassy Knoll. And with us, I believe for the first time this year, is a frequent guest, Andy Colvin, who I guess when last we spoke was back in his old stomping grounds in and around West Virginia and is back there again. And so we're doing another remote. And Andy, thanks for coming back. And what's going on?
Well, we're traveling around southwestern Ohio.
As you speak?
At some of the different, I'm traveling around with Dave Scott of Passing Lane Investigations, looking at Indian spots and haunted sites, and they sort of seem to relate. And just all these different ones that are around. There's just so many of them in
what do you mean?
Cincinnati.
What do you mean by they seem to relate? I mean, you mean there's some interconnectivity, but how so?
Well, that's what we're wondering. Maybe it's because these are older sites that were chosen by peoples who are a little more in tune with spiritual things, and by using them for so long, perhaps that sort of charged these areas up a little more, and then you have various hauntings and creature sightings and things going on at the same places.
A couple of things. First of all, let me ask you this. It's interesting, by the way, that the first person who ever told me, and was in an office setting, this is back in the bad old FBI days, having a discussion, and across the room, this guy from Ohio said, and it was relative to the conversation taking place, he said, no tornadoes ever set down on an Indian burial ground. And I'm like, you kidding me? He's like, no. I mean, that's as far as he knew. And like I said, he was an Ohio guy. I don't know from what part of the state. And then there was another guy I met down there who went back to where he came from, and that was Shenandoah, Iowa, in the southwest corner of that state. And he said the same thing. Shenandoah had burial grounds, and tornadoes would come through, and they would leave Shenandoah alone. And as far as I know, it's still, to this day, the same way. But what I wanted to ask you, are burial mounds, are they located, do you know, necessarily somewhere parallel to rivers? Are rivers a big place to have burial grounds set aside?
Well, they seem to be a place where you have the mound. And again, we don't know if these are naturally made or man-made, but the mounds certainly seem to follow the rivers, although not totally, but most of the time. And sometimes they involve burials, but we don't know if the burials are just something that came on later, that someone just decided to stick a particular prominent individual, the body of such an individual in a mound for some reason, like to project their consciousness into heaven or something like that.
Down here by me, Jeff Collins, who was the former owner of the AM stations on which we once broadcast the shows, his wife got her PhD in, I believe, archaeology, and used to go on digs, and the two of them would go out together. Jeff was big for Indian heads and Indian artifacts. There is a place near us where there are two rivers that join. They're one of the only north-flowing rivers in the United States. The North River, which is famous for overflowing up in North Dakota, is one of them. But this river is the Withlacoochee. And where the two branches meet, I'd say maybe 60 miles north of here, it was called the Cove of the Withlacoochee. And I don't know if you're familiar with this personage from around the 1830s. I think you might have heard of the Seminole tribe. Have you ever heard of Osceola?
Yeah, I have.
All right, Osceola, of course, was never, well, he's thought to have been a chief. He never was. Not really. I mean, he wasn't in the royal line, if you will, but he was pretty much an enforcer who, got to the point of being followed by his people. He was not pure blood Native American. But his hideaway was up at the Cove of the Withlacoochee. And so they went up there on digs. And Jeff said to his wife, where are the burial mounds? She said, they're right there in front of you. The point being, there really isn't a lot of riverside topography in Florida. It's pretty flat, as you well know, and along riverbanks there isn't that much of a decline. But where they went and they were going by canoe, he's a guy from the north too, and he's looking at the riverbanks thinking no big deal. And she said that's them right there. And I don't know if they were allowed to dig into them or whatever, but my point is down here also that seems to be the case with those peoples that were down in this area, which are now all called Seminole, but they really weren't to begin with. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just coughing. I've had a little cold up here.
Okay.
Cold.
Are you holding a handheld phone?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So having said that, again, is there anything distinct to that area, especially around the Ohio River Valley, where there's more, or if there's something particular to the design or where they appear?
Well, it's pretty incredible. There's just hundreds of mounds here, and still even. And so who knows how many were torn down, but I mean, it's almost like it's almost impossible, I think, for that many mounds to have been made by people. You know, it really, I sort of am leaning toward the natural formation theory. And it could be because it's such an old area that it wasn't really raked over too badly by the ice age, you know, and a lot of this stuff is still here that was from way, way before. It may have taken thousands of years for these mounds to be formed, for the various layers of minerals to sort of leach up through the earth and to form them.
All right,
and, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so are you referring to them not necessarily as burial mounds, but just mounds in general?
Yeah, because, I mean, some of them have burials in them, but I don't know. We're not sure that that's the real reason they're there.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to ask you, because apparently this is somewhat apparent out around, I think, part of the Mississippi and maybe the Missouri, where there are earthen pyramids that seem to probably belong to an era, of course, as you know, of pyramid building in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, the most well-known, I guess, is related to the Mayans. But is there anything like that? Do you remember, or have you come upon in the West Virginia, Ohio area, Kentucky, whatever?
Pyramid? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. Not intact, no. But
okay.
And a lot of the stuff's just kind of very cryptic. You'll see references to all these stoneworks that were along the Kanawha River, which flows into the Point Pleasant, into the Ohio there. And
right.
But you don't can't find a map of them. You can't really find where they were. It's all been sort of covered up. So who knows what they were? But I think they talk about the pyramids in Egypt, and the fact that I was just reading through Hancock's book, Fingerprints of the Gods, and they don't know how old those things are. I think it could be that this area here we're talking about in the Ohio Valley was just there could have been pyramids there way before even the Egyptian pyramids, and those have been so degraded over time, that there's nothing left but like the mounds that you have, say, near St. Louis and so forth, the larger ones.
Right.
And maybe even some of the smaller ones once had some sort of stones over them. You sort of get the feeling that this whole area was once populated way, way, way back. So maybe something catastrophic happened. I think there's evidence of that there were some great earthquakes and things, floods and things, that wiped out the population on this side of the earth and or this continent, and it sort of kept on going in Europe and Africa. But
I would have said
there were people here. There were people living. They just were sort of more primitive, and maybe that's just a function of the fact that this area was devastated at some time. And maybe the mounds are even some sort of result of flooding or distillation.
Erosion, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, if the rivers can cut the Grand Canyon and other areas, I'm sure they could put a little dent, in the hills of the Northeast. I was going to make a wisecrack about catastrophic events And that would be, the Europeans coming to America. So,
yeah.
So what else is shaking out there?
Well, I don't know if you want to hear. We've got some. I could talk about some of the spots we've hit, and then I've also got my usual list of random notes that I have compiled since I talked to you last that sort of relate to different things that we've talked about over time.
All right. Well, let's hit. I mean, what is the reason why you're there, more or less, if you can tell us?
Well, it's to work in this area, try to find out more about the mounds, talk with someone like Dave who knows more about the Indian side of things, and he also knows a lot about just the history of the battles between the Indians and the white men, and just find out more because there's so much to learn about Ohio. There's this awesome map that's been put out not too long ago actually it was inspired by the Mothman Prophecies movie. Some people saw that movie and decided that they wanted to put together a map of the paranormal for Ohio. And so they have this large fold-out map. It's called the Hidden Ohio Map. And it's got a lot of different spots laid out, places you can go to check out things, and there's sort of a list of the different major sightings of different creatures, different haunting areas, and you do find that the creature sightings, the mounds, and the hauntings all sort of do fall in areas together, roughly. And so right now we're just sort of focusing on the areas around Cincinnati, which has a long history of these things, especially downtown Cincinnati, at one time was covered in mounds, and there's just a ton of different paranormal things that have gone on here, and including, as we talked about, sort of the Masonic lore, and they were attracted to this area too, I think, and also the gambling legends of coming out of here, and how the military and the KKK and the stimulation of the Civil War. Industrialists live here. There's just an amazing amount of wealth. In fact, one of the wealthier parts of town, Indian Hill, has a road called Spooky Hollow that has a long history of hauntings. And in fact, Dave can tell you about it later if we have a little time at the end, how he's driven down there and had his lights go out in his car. And he's found lots of different people that have had that happen, and that's a common sort of paranormal thing to have happen, is where you just lose all power in your car for a short time, and then a lot of people sometimes will see a creature as well. Go ahead.
All right, I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if this is the time to do it, and of course we could never do really justice to it, but I just wanted to ask because we have a couple listeners from Cincinnati who have sent information along with regard to the city. But isn't there and didn't you talk about this last time, isn't there a particular large pyramid in Cincinnati, and was that man-made?
Oh, yeah, that was a mason, a famous mason here in town who built a pyramid, his house in the shape of a pyramid, and that's up near Hamilton, which we were just at yesterday. We were checking out an area there called Hangman's Hollow, where someone was hung back in the 1800s, and then people since then feel like that the woods there have been haunted, and you can hear growlings and things, and see creatures and ghosts and things there. Some of the other places we looked at were Lick Road, which is in that a little south. It's south of there, more in northern Cincinnati, where a woman was murdered. And then if you go there, you will see the word "help" might appear on your windshield. And a lot of these things involve cars. There's or motors or bikes. There's a place called Buell Road, Buell, that we went to, where they have a ghost bike, a boy on a bike, and you can turn off your car there, and you'll see the boy. Supposedly, if he comes all the way to you, you'll die within 7 days. There's something called the Dead Man's Curve, which is in Amelia, Ohio, and there you can see a ghost car, which is a '69 Roadrunner. And you might also see a faceless shadow man hitchhiking there who may jump on your car. There's a mound right there, too. Then we checked out Pond Run, which is down near New Richmond, Ohio, along the Ohio River, where someone was murdered. And then afterwards, people have seen this guy. He's called the Hook Man. He may jump on your car and do something in your car. Is that right, Dave? Yeah. Dave's here with me. Then we went up to Oxford, Ohio, which is where Miami University is.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They have a phantom motorcycle there, where a guy was killed on a motorcycle, and now his ghost sort of haunts the stretch of road. You can turn your car lights on 3 times and then see the lights of the motorcycle coming toward you.
Let me ask you something before you go any further, if I could. One, do you find... And maybe Dave can speak to this too. I don't know what kind of arrangement you have over there, but it seems to me, and maybe because it's in the East and a little bit more proximate to where you grew up and I grew up, but that there was, or maybe it's got to do with mountain people or rural folk, I don't know. But was there a certain, I guess, palpable, and I'll call it spirituality, some would call it magic, with Appalachian people?
Well, I think so, yeah, because they're not as plugged into all the distractions of the media and not quite as programmed, by advertising and all that stuff. So, yeah, they're closer to the earth.
Well, what I'm thinking is, I've lived in Vermont, and you have quote mountain people or people that are out in the Northeast Kingdom up in Vermont, and they're a little bit different than everyone else. But pretty much they've succumbed to the cosmopolitan effects of the Northeast, obviously Boston, New York. But I think it struck me when I was at OU, Andrew, and in and around there, which I didn't spend a lot of time with, that in that run, I would say from, I don't know, just outside Pittsburgh, southwest, maybe into Kentucky, that part of Appalachia still seems, to me, it was at least in the late 70s, it appeared to me because perhaps of the ruggedness that it was, I want to say, a bit insulated from cosmopolitan incursions, and that they've kept their lifestyle, even to the point perhaps incestuously, of being a closed society. What about that?
Well, yeah, I generally agree with that, yeah.
All right, and also, and I guess what this comes from really is not only have been down there, but have watching a number of documentaries because based on Appalachian people, and actually, they had their own vocabulary, very distinct from any other what you would call rural or mountain people. So, yeah, that's more or less. The other thing I want to ask you about is Cincinnati itself. Cincinnati seems to be a very, very, in quotes, interesting place. I don't know how much you guys know about the history of it in this sense, but it always has struck me as being a southern city in a northern state. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. When you have an extremely conservative town right across the river from an extremely corrupt and liberal town like Newport, where you had all the big mobsters who gravitated out to start Vegas and Havana, all those gambling facilities. It's I don't know how that came about, how you had so many different things. Like, for instance, we were just checking out Mount Adams, which is this mount right downtown where the wealthy lived at one time, the wealthy Masons like Nicholas Longworth, and they have a couple of old Catholic churches there with supposedly tunnels running underneath the whole place. It's where they made wine in the old days. The monks made wine. There's a monastery there that we looked at. It was a German Catholic area, and this kind of ties in with. I'm not going to say that they were Nazis, but I would say that they certainly supported these. This is sort of where your industrialists came from. A lot of them were German Catholics and did support Hitler, and I would imagine that the Rockefellers and the Bushes and those folks also, fall into that camp. Well, certainly the Rockefellers were German.
And I think JD got his start and started the empire up in Cleveland.
Folks tie into the Masons, to the Freemasons, and there's all these rumors in Cincinnati of different crematoriums, and in fact, Mount Adams was rumored to have had a crematorium. Downard, James Shelby Downard wrote about that they would get rid of their enemies sometimes that way. And so this legacy is there, and it's manifested in big oil, in big agri. A lot of food companies
sure.
here, defense companies, and that's sort of. They sort of run a lot of different things on the side, they gambling and entertainment. And I was in Columbus the other day and found out that Schwarzenegger has a big presence in Columbus. Arnold Schwarzenegger, and is friends with a major Jewish investor named Les Wexner, and I think there's even a big center there named after Wexner, but he's the owner of Victoria's Secret and The Limited.
Okay.
So there you have a big Jewish investor who's linked with someone who's Schwarzenegger, whose father was a Nazi. And then there's a link to Florida there because one of the major Disney architects moved up from Florida to Columbus to help build the Easton Mall there, which is this mall outside of Columbus in New Albany. And you start to wonder, how all this stuff starts connecting up at the top, and how the money's flowing up there.
But you mentioned earlier about the KKK attachments to Cincinnati, right?
Yeah, the Knights of Columbus, or the Knights of were they the ones who did who were involved in the Golden Circle, the Knights of the Golden Circle?
Well, that's where I was going to go. Something tells me I haven't boned up on my Cincinnati history, although Eric from Cincinnati will probably give me a buzz, and that's all right, because I probably should do more, and he's pretty hip on this stuff. But the Knights of the Golden Circle, which predate the KKK, and probably were very key and very unknown principles in what would become the preparation for the Civil War. And I thought that the Knights of the Golden Circle, I don't know if they called Cincinnati home, but it seemed like there was some activity, if my memory serves, with the Knights of the Golden Circle and Cincinnati.
Yeah, and we talked about that before, and it does tie into big business.
Sure.
Because that was what the Civil War was all about.
Thank you.
And today you have, big business is here in Ohio, and you have. I'm sort of referring to my random notes now, just some things I've seen recently. I've heard that General Motors is now has plants in Russia, Argentina, Brazil, and China. These are all areas that the Rockefellers have been in for a long time. You have GE buying planes now from China. So it's like, they built up their base here, and now they're moving it out in, to the world, and leaving us with this problem now that we have Obama to try to clean up, which is no jobs, big economic problems. That's all a result, I think, of just moving everything overseas.
But, Andy, you're right. I mean, this is one of those things that I thought about when I was younger and just walked away from. But it's one of those things that led me to where I am today, wishing that was to, search out if there really were a conspiracy. And one of the things that bugged me was, and this started to take place heavily in the beginning of the 70s, which led me to make note of this in college, and that is, what is the deal with U.S. companies sending the means of production overseas? And I'm saying, they always ask for patriotism from us, from the people, to go over and fight or whatever. But then you have corporations that were birthed and nurtured in the United States, and then these companies decide they don't want to pay workers such and such a wage, and they go someplace else for sweatshop labor. And I'm like, where's the patriotism on their parts? So this bit about outsourcing has been going on for over 35 years. And like you said, it gets birthed here, and then they move it somewhere else. And, I'm not getting where the benefit is for us. And, so anyway.
Well, they've been doing it here in the United States for even longer. They've been moving it around. They were moving it around from state to state. They started off really early in West Virginia. That was your first big oil state. I mean, natural gas was first drilled in West Virginia, right in downtown Charleston. It was the very first gas well ever. And then they, it spread to Pennsylvania and Ohio. And they built up all these different plants and things here and infrastructure, and then they moved it west, and then they moved it south. And
well, that's a really good point, because, and this is interesting, I mean, John D. Rockefeller fathering the oil industry, it happened up in the Northeast. And in a strange irony, who bought land in northwest Pennsylvania around what we now know as Oil City, but John Wilkes Booth. So Booth wasn't as loony or as depauperate as people think he was. He was plugged in too. I think it's also interesting that John D. Rockefeller got a pass on the Civil War, but be that as it may. But here you have an industry that was born in northeast Ohio and northwest Pennsylvania, and you couldn't find an oil well there now. It all moved south. And I think that's why you refer to cities such as, well, once upon a time Pittsburgh, but Buffalo and maybe Baltimore and other cities as Rust Belt cities, because you're right, they picked up originally and left the Northeast and went to southern climes or southwest or whatever. And then, like you said, eventually a lot of this stuff was moved abroad.
Now, that reminds me of something very early in the 20s and the 30s. They started coming up with Butadiene in Charleston. That's a synthetic rubber product that was eventually used to send over to Germany during the war. With IG Farben and Standard were sharing this patent for the synthetic rubber that was being made in Charleston. Just this week, I was hunting around and found out that's in C4 explosive. So, you have all this terrorism going on today, and you wonder where they're getting their explosives. Well, they're getting them from these chemical companies. They're getting them from, from carbide and those offshoots that, carbide doesn't exist anymore, but it's now Dow or what, but they're making the stuff at the chemical plants, and I'm actually starting to wonder if there's two things. Two new little theories I have. One is that they were making C4 in Charleston during the Mothman era, and that's what my dad may have been talking about when he was saying that some of the guys were sneaking stuff out in their lunch pails and also threatening to blow up the plant. So they may have been sneaking some of the benzene out that they were making, and making C4 at home. And another theory I have is that they could have been building UFOs there because the Nazi technology that was developed. Was it Auschwitz? It was the big Butadine plant in Germany was the cover for where they were building the early saucers.
Okay.
So they could have been doing the same thing in Charleston, using that plant, the sister plant in Charleston, as a cover for building UFOs there. And that, of course, would explain why why the biggest UFO flap in history was during the Mothman era in 1966 and 67 in West Virginia and Ohio. They were right there, so they could just fly them right out, test them, and then make people think that they were being abducted by aliens.
Well, let me ask you about the explosive situation, and here's what happened. About maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I watched a movie I'd not seen. It was not one of those, big marquee movies, but they're usually the best. And it had to do, it supposedly was a true story about a group of young people from probably junior high into high school age, as the movie's timeline went, that were trying to create a rocket. Are you familiar with this? It would probably have been 1950s, West Virginia, someplace south of Welch.
Yeah, that did have to do with the book Rocket Boys. That movie was about that guy's story. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, is that part of this whole thing, so to speak?
Well, I mean, yeah, and it links to Parsons, who developed the rocket fuel and also was this occultist in the OTO, and then you had OTO members hanging around the Mothman Point Pleasant at that time.
So, all right, now just do you know if any of those figures or characters in that movie were any of them Parsons?
No.
Okay.
No, but they went on to work at NASA. A couple of them did, and
I didn't catch it. When I came into the movie a little bit later, and until the end, I didn't realize it was supposed to have been based on a true story. It kind of reminded me of, like, if you would, Stand by Stephen King, the movie that was made from that book. Stand By Me. And I'm like, it was a nice kid's tale anyway, and then lo and behold, supposedly it was true. Well, I guess it is true. And then I didn't catch the names or who they might have been in real life. So that's why I asked you if any of those characters might have been Parsons. So, thanks for clearing me up on that. That was a good movie, by the way, but, lo and behold, here you are. And you can't confirm the fact that did go down. And again, it didn't seem like any of those children's parents were so well connected. And I say this only because of what happened to you and Harriet and stuff with, the military coming in and wanting to tap into some of the more brighter children's brains. But you don't know if any of that had happened at all in that episode with the Rocket Boys.
Oh, well, I'd say it was very similar. I would imagine that, that there's definitely an infrastructure sort of in West Virginia where these certain smaller towns have formerly had people that were in the agencies, and their kids and their grandkids and so on there's a pipeline, and they love to get people from these small towns who are sort of right wing and aren't going to question anything.
I also should tell you this because I haven't talked to you since this episode also, but I rarely go to a social function, but I did in this case, and I don't want to say too much about who it was attached to, but the family that was throwing it has a daughter that works in the White House as not part of any administration, but part of a government agency. And she gets sent out regularly to go to West Virginia for seminars. So I just thought I'd throw that out. Anyway.
Okay.
I mean, all I'm saying is that West Virginia, you know what? They should put on the license plate, a really interesting place. So.
Yeah. You want me to just I've got like 3 pages here of notes. You just want me to do each page, and then we can talk about whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, obviously we're not goal-oriented, so if you don't get through all 3 pages, I mean, there'll always be another day, at least we think. So, yeah, I would rather go for the quality rather than the quantity, so let's see where it takes us. And also, if you want me to give you a heads up, if we have 10 minutes left to go or something like that, if you wanted to involve Dave in this, I'll tell you that as well. You let me know.
Okay. Well, you were mentioning earlier about something you said made me think of Big Oil and how they may be involved in the building of these underground facilities, because they would know more about drilling than anybody else and how they're and the underground geology.
That's right.
And this guy recently wrote to me and you about, he's a geophysicist, and he was saying that he somewhere along the way he became more intuitive, or he actually said he was watched as a kid, and then as he got older he learned that he had psychic powers, and that he's found two different big paleontology sites using his intuition. He says he goes there and he can feel when he's over, a lot of dinosaur bones. And he also just told me that he was writing about these underground sites and saying that they situate them in certain rock formations so that they can't be spied on. Like they use shale because shale will absorb any kind of bomb. And it also shields from electromagnetism. And
also, what about bluestone, Andy?
Yeah, the bluestone, the greenstone, and he said that there's a site near Harper's Ferry, which when you mentioned John Wilkes Booth, I thought of Harper's Ferry, and he said that there's a site R near Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if he meant Waynesboro, Virginia, or Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, but that's a note that I made, and I think it does sort of point toward Big Oil as being a private source for how they get those things made. Also,
interestingly, Booth also had a farm in West Virginia in Harper's Ferry on the Heights, and his estranged wife held on to it, and it's reputed in the book Dark Union that Booth, who did not die in Garrett's barn, actually hid out, ironically in such proximity to Washington, D.C., in that very farm until supposedly the heat blew over. But here you have a certain connection with Booth and perhaps Rockefeller. I know that I'm extrapolating here, but I find it interesting that he would be so close to the place where he committed the perfidy and not have been uncovered, and he waited there until I guess things blew over, so to speak, and then he made his way out to the west and then eventually out to, of all places, India. But so in other words, what I'm saying is, yeah, Harper's Ferry again. Here's where Booth had a place as well.
Okay, well, let me finish off this page, and I think you're going to find that there's some quality points in here, and not quality, but quantity, but quality. Okay, you ready?
Yes, yeah. What you're saying is shut up because you have better stuff than I do. All right, go ahead.
Well, we talked about Booth. We talked about that stuff a couple times, and so I just wanted to hit a couple of newer ideas.
No problem. I'm kidding. Sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort of. Go.
One of the new things I just realized, John Keel, I found a reference where he was saying that Men in Black wear both naval and Air Force insignia, and something I hadn't noticed before that he had said, and then that actually jibes totally with what Harriet was saying. She said that a guy with the same insignia had come to our grade school.
That's right.
That's one point. Another point that was made on the Tom Hartman show was that there's only been 2 times when there were middle classes in Europe, and each time after the middle class was built up, there was a destruction of it. One was the Black Death, which was probably planned, and then there was one after the big gold rush of the 1600s when they came over here and got all the gold from South America. That's just a kind of that doesn't really take us anywhere, but something I noted. Well, he also had he also had a person on there that said she has written a book about Big Oil. She was saying that that they reconstituted Standard Oil now. That it's sort of like the Terminator, the morphing Terminator robot from the Terminator 3. It's gotten itself back together, and what they did was they changed the antitrust focus. The original antitrust had to do with size of companies, and so what they did was they started focusing on price instead. Huh. And so it all just became about making sure that they weren't price fixing. But that wasn't the original intent of antitrust, and so that was how they were able to remerge. And so it says, let's see, the merger started in 2000, actually. And it says during the 80s and 90s, they refocused on raising gas prices, using their refinery. You know, the companies can focus on different parts of the process depending on what they want to do. And so in 2000, they went back to a crude emphasis on the shipment of oil rather than the retail refining issue. And in 2000, they also increased voting or lobbying for voting, lobbying politicians, and they got Phil Gramm to slip in the Commodities Futures Act, which allowed Enron to do its thing. And henceforth, all these exchanges have not been regulated by the government, and that has led to a false scarcity and they've done that with electricity as well as with crude oil. And so by now, we've got more than half of our oil trades are not regulated at all under this something called ICE, which started in 2006. It's like a new unregulated trading market for oil. And what is she predicting here for the future? Well, she's saying this whole thing about the green, BP has all these green ads and things, but they only spend 4% on green technology. And Exxon, the Rockefellers, only spend 0. They don't even spend anything on green technology at all. Another thing, my little theory. You know how Christ was probably black, but they make him seem to be white in today,
All right, good.
You there?
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Anyway, okay. I just couldn't hear you. Okay. Well, I think there may be the same thing with the Men in Black, that the Men in Black actually were Asian, but now in all the depictions you see, they're made to seem like they're white guys in black suits. And there are also these weird things that MIBs do to people are never really analyzed. But I think when you have a man in black who does something and says something very strange to someone, it could be a form of induction for hypnotherapy, for hypnosis. In other words, they're using an odd or confusing act to create momentary confusion in the person they're dealing with in order to hypnotize them. Here's another random note. Bush was associated with Standard Oil of California. I don't know if that's Bruce Adamson who found that link.
Okay.
He also said that Henry Lucas, the serial killer, was working for Bush Sr. I don't know what the evidence for that is, but...
well, he's a serial killer. That's the evidence.
Sticking with the Rockefellers for just a second, there was another lady on the radio who was talking about, she'd just been in Africa. She was saying that the Rockefellers and Bill Gates have gotten together, and they're trying to genetically modify sorghum in Kenya on behalf of DuPont. So here, and DuPont, owned the TNT area where Mothman was seen. So you see a direct connection here now between Rockefellers and DuPonts. We also have that old connection between the DuPonts and George Washington, and he owned the land that sits between Charleston and Point Pleasant. And, Indrid Cold supposedly lived in that town of Eleanor, or was it Eleanor? Midway, that Rockefeller once owned. I think I had another Indrid Cold point here. Oh yeah, Indrid was told by Woody, Indrid's a spaceman, telling contactee Woody Derenberger that Indrid was saying he was from Ganymedes, which is the same thing that a lot of South American contactees were told. Like, for instance, there's a guy called Sixto Paz Wells, who also was saying he was being told by Asian-looking man in black that they were from Ganymede. And, Indrid was Asian-looking. And it makes you wonder if, Big Oil or the Nazis were involved in this, because all of these South American contactees were being told the same things that we West Virginia contactees were being told. And this lady on the radio was talking about WTO being about the WTO protest being about the stopping the patenting of plants. Okay, because prior to WTO, plants, you could only, patent microorganisms, not plants. Now, at that WTO meeting, they wanted to patent plants themselves, and hence we had the big protest. And I think because of, I've always felt that because of WTO, the strength of that protest, that they immediately went into the Millennium Games in the military to sort of get going on the Iraq invasion, and then they had to have 9/11 occur in order to have the Iraq invasion. And then the last thing on this page is George Norrie on January 13th. Norrie's
Naval Intelligence, yeah.
He had Al Bielek on there. Al claims that he was a time traveler from the Philadelphia experiment, and it seems really bogus. Al's always seemed really bogus, but Norrie totally buttered him up. And I was wondering about this, and I think, why do you have a Navy guy buttering up this guy's story, whose story really discredits the Philadelphia experiment? So what Bielek does is he tells the story pretty much scientifically as it is. Yes, they were doing experiments with invisibility and bombarding a ship with all these waves and things, but then they introduced the time travel story to totally discredit all the other stuff. And I think that's why Norrie has Bielek on there. It's to actually discredit the scientific part or the real part of the Philadelphia experiment story on behalf of the Navy. And another point that there's another time traveler named John Titor, you may have heard of. These guys get a lot of press. These guys that have these fake stories get tons of press, and everybody's always talking about them, blah, blah, blah. Well, Titor posted a link to a show called Quattro last year, and I noticed that an image that was from this show, this is, again, a Spanish show coming from South America, I think, or the Spanish-speaking countries, which kind of makes you think of the Vatican, because the Vatican's really big in South America. And they have this image of a hooded figure with a satchel that somebody supposedly saw. And it looks very similar to this photo that I took in 1979 of this thing that appeared, this, shadowy thing that appeared in a crop circle. And I'm not sure what that's about. It seems like a little synchronicity that's sort of pointing, in the direction of conspiracy. Titor is also known for posting stuff about Lauren Coleman, Coleman's point of view about Mothman being a demon and all that. Well, that's that page. You got any comments on that, Biz?
Well, lastly, you raise a good point. I know you don't want to dwell on this, but, there's a certain parallelism here. Norrie is on Coast to Coast for a reason. And I'm going to contend that anybody that comes on that show ain't shooting straight, to include guys like Alex Jones and Steve Quayle. Having Bielek on, you felt, was a way of discrediting the credibility of the Philadelphia experiment. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. The fact that guy was naval intelligence and the Philadelphia experiment was naval, that doesn't matter. Norrie is a shill, as Art Bell was a shill. And they're out there to poke a hole in anything that has any degree of truth. Alex Jones did the same thing with the Vatican. He had Jordan Maxwell on, who I don't think has any reason or authority to speak about the Vatican. And so Jones could get away with having Jordan Maxwell on to speak to it, because he talked about it for once. But then days later, he whacked Maxwell. Do you see what I'm saying? So in other words, the guy comes on with a message, and then he whacks the messenger, so therefore everybody says, well, then the message is no good. Just like Bielek with the Philadelphia experiment. You see what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
All right. So what I'm just saying, this is standard operating procedure for mainstream media, and I would consider C2C, Coast to Coast, somewhat mainstream. I know it's out there with shadow people and flying rods and all that, but they do a very serious job with regard to what is really going on and being hidden in this country. So I just want to throw that out with regarding that. And also, real quick, this bit about what you were saying about Standard Oil, I was saying the same thing back in 99, 2000, 2001, as I started to see what I would call a remonopolization of the oil industry. I was watching gas stations change. I mean, who's BP involved with now? Mobil? You know what I mean? It's the same thing all over again. So, yeah, it was astute that you had said that, and I had witnessed that myself. And, we're back in the same ballpark as we always been.
Yeah. Can we go a little over an hour, or can we keep it to an hour today?
No, again, I mean, let's...
Because we could conceivably do... finish up my next year in one more fail swoop.
No, let's do it. Well, I mean, it's until I get with the network. The clock doesn't mean too much.
Okay, let's do some random things here. Thomas Jefferson mentioned that he thought the Episcopalians would be the most likely religion to exploit freedom of religion. And it turns out that Episcopalians, according to Harriet at least, are the CIA's preferred religion.
Well, they're also they are what I would call a Protestantized Catholicism. They're a very interesting group because they're supposed to be Protestant and their trappings are all Catholic. So you take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Earlier, something you mentioned made me think of this little theory. I forget what you were talking about, but it reminded me of this.
You make me feel so important, I can't tell you.
How's that?
No, never mind. I'll fix
being facetious?
Yes, I am. Although my feelings are very hurt. Now, go ahead.
Because I'm rolling right on to the next item.
No, because and whipping me upside the head. All right, forget what I had said. What did it remind you of? Christmas.
Excuse me. Well, you were talking about how they will. I think they will. They'll do one thing and then they'll switch it up and do another thing, and it tends to not make sense. Well, what they generally seem to do is, I think there's two ways of looking at the world. You can look at the world as unified, or you can look at it as separate. Items are all separate, everyone's separate. Or and that's a Western way of looking at things. The Eastern view is more everything is underlying unity. Well, what the corporatists do is they play those two ideas off of each other all the time.
Right.
Whenever it's time to tighten the belts, which Obama is going to be doing here any minute, we're all unified and we all have to come together and sacrifice. But when profits are high, well, the CEOs get to make 10,000 more per hour than you do.
That's right.
Anyway, more points here. This is an interesting little thing. I remember when I was talking about when the Pope was in the country, they happened to have that polygamous cult that sort of took all the thunder away from the Pope. The Pope's pedophilia. He was apologizing for pedophilia, and at the same time they have this polygamous ranch that's supposedly, doing that. It turns out that whole thing was a hoax, more or less, and if you can look this up on Wikipedia, someone named Rosita Swinton, a childless woman, they actually know who she is, a childless woman who impersonated Sarah and Laura, who supposedly was someone at the compound. And she was the one calling the state of Texas and getting them to investigate this cult. And the case was actually dropped. I mean, the case against the cult was dropped after the Pope left town.
And the children were returned to their families. That's correct.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Also, I believe that Ratzinger, Joey Ratz, now the Pope, got involved in one of these cases with pedophilia. I'm not saying he was a principal in it. I don't know if it was underneath his aegis or whatever. And I think it was out in Texas, in fact. Funny they should use that state.
Well, and speaking of Mormon polygamists, there's a group of Mormon polygamists that were formed in 1932 called the Council of Friends, where they have 7 high priests who, I guess, rule on polygamy or whatever. But it sort of reminded me of the Council of Nine.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And all that. And speaking of Andrija Puharich, who was a big proponent of the Council of Nine, Puharich was seen at a party held by Jim Moseley in New York during the Mothman era. And this comes from Alan Greenfield, who was there. So you have, Moseley was Gray Barker's best friend. Who's Gray Barker? The guy who wrote the first book on Mothman. So you have a direct connection here between Puharich and the events in West Virginia with the Mothman.
Yep.
And we've been talking about this guy forever, and we didn't really have a real connection. We just, there were just these little things,
Hey, Andy, Puharich is one of those guys through a certain time period that reminds me of the song You're So Vain, in the sense that he's where he should be all the time.
Yeah.
But, isn't that the truth? We went back and forth. It's like, guess who popped up here? Guess who popped up here? AP.
Well, you know who else is like that? Charlie Manson. What I'm finding here is that there's all these legends about Charles Manson here in Cincinnati. That he lived here, that he was seen at this place, he was seen at this place. There's even a rumor that he was at this paranormal spot here called Buffalo Ridge. Now, Manson was born in Cincinnati, and I think that's why. I think people, they want to be associated with him somehow because, at some subconscious level, people like him because he does, he bucks the system, and he sort of tells it like it is. And I think, everyone sort of secretly wants to have that, power,
right,
or whatever. Because if you see a movie like Sicko, which I just saw recently, you just see how terrible, like Michael Moore went to these other countries, and you just see how other countries have so much better societies in a way because they allow people to protest, they allow people to have, protest for better health care. The government helps them out when they have kids. There's nannies. There's free nannies in France. There's free health care in Cuba. And they're closing down Guantanamo today. Supposedly, Obama's going to.
They're closing down. They're closing down Gitmo.
Or Gitmo. But is that different than Guantanamo? Is that?
Well, Gitmo's inside Guantanamo. And that's another whole interesting thing about how in the world the U.S. and Cuba supposedly being such adversaries, where Cuba can allow the United States still to hold on to a patch of their land, and where Cuban workers go to work. It's crazy. But Gitmo is within Guantanamo. Gitmo, I think, is the terrorist prison that they're going to abolish, I guess you could say. I haven't seen anything where, the United States has given up Guantanamo.
Right. Here's a little strange little synchronicity. It really probably meaningless, but
nevertheless,
another movie I saw was The Dark Knight. The whole Batman legend. As the movie ends, you start to think. Right as the movie ended, I said that's Mothman because of something. The way they said it, the way he's a protector. Batman's flying off, and the way they said it just really sounded a lot like the Mothman, where he's sort of a protector watching over the city. No one can really admit that he's good, and that's sort of the way Mothman is. Everyone wants to see him as a demon, but because he's kind of scary, but ultimately he's working for people's best interest. And one of the scenes in that movie is there's some guy has an implant in his stomach. It's a phone. It's a cell phone bomb. I don't know if you saw the movie or not. Did you see it?
No, I didn't.
Okay. That's a pretty disturbing scene. This guy's stomach blows up the whole, police station. And then right before I saw the movie, I was leafing back through some files, and I saw that one of the contactees I interviewed had said that he had an implant in his abdomen, that it had been implanted there by the alien.
And listen,
Anyway.
let me just ask you. Well, let me make one statement if I could. The thing about Batman, and you're seeing somewhat of a relation with Garuda, correct? Or Mothman?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. The only thing I can say, and real quick, and that is this: as the Batman legend continues and is mostly cinematized, it becomes less like the character, I guess, that was conceived by Bob Kane. I think that was it, right? I like Batman of all the heroes, and this goes back to I remember at 5 years old, because Batman seemed to be the most human-like in the fact that he couldn't fly necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He seemed to be more of a human than anything else. And as the movies continue, he gets, what I would say, a little bit more power, whether it's manufactured or technological. But he seems to be less and less like the original Batman and leaning a little bit more to a Superman type of character. And it also gets much more darker. All right, Batman, hanging caves, that's kind of dark. But we could live with that because obviously on the surface he was a very well-to-do person. I don't know where that goes, but I just find that the Batman legend is kind of morphing. And, I don't know if that takes it more toward Mothman. It might. But, I mean, would you say, and I guess I shouldn't ask you this, but don't you consider Mothman, if you had a choice between benevolent and malevolent, it would go to the side of benevolence, would it not?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right, okay. All right. I just see a duality with Batman as it's being portrayed now, being perhaps more Mothman-like in the sense of, not being free from terra firma, but it's taking on a darker connotation, although supposedly still on the side of right. That's all.
Oh, yeah, one thing that I forgot to mention before, when you have these stories where the media is trying to, dissuade, like the Pope thing, where the media has one story here to cover up another, there's one that's in the new book, Mothman's Photographer 3. It's a quote from a CIA chief that I found somewhere in some book. I can't remember offhand, but there was when their operations in one of the South American countries had been revealed, the CIA chief said, well, let's just put out some UFO stories in the media to cover it up.
Yeah.
And this is like in the 50s. So they've been doing this a long time. And another one that I don't know if this is covering anything up in particular, but there was a blue orb story that got big play. There was this blue orb that was seen at a gas station in Parma, Ohio. Do you remember that one?
No.
It's in Cleveland. It's in Cleveland.
No.
It turns out that that's where the Cleveland Ufology Project meet. Not at that gas station, but on the same road, on the same street. This is the one of the oldest UFO groups in the country, and they used to have a big convention there. And during the Mothman events, they had a convention there that was that Gray Barker went to, and along the way he was trailed by a Catholic priest, a man in black who was a priest. But anyway, this gas station it's on Pleasant Valley Road, and the Cleveland Ufology Project, the gas station is at 11,000 Pleasant Valley Road. So it has the Pleasant name in it, which has shown up several times, kind of referring to the name game here, and the number 11. And some other name game items here. The name Myrrh, M-Y-R-R-H, We Three Kings of Orient are, that song,
yeah.
Myrrh.
Frankincense, myrrh, and yeah.
Yeah, with the three wise men, the three MIBs or whatever that followed the star. Myrrh is associated with death, and also possibly associated with the name Moor that we've talked about many times, because they are very similar. Moor, by the way, the name, the Moors, relates to the name mortuary. And again, we have tons of mortuary stories in Cincinnati about these secret crematoriums it seems to happen. You know, there's several locations where they rumor they have these secret crematoriums. The word mourn, M-O-U-R-N, mortal, and mermaid. I don't know why I threw mermaid in there, but
yeah, what's going on with that?
Well,
yeah, what?
you know, it's a water creature, and the Moors have been associated with water throughout their history. You know, you moor your boat.
Okay. Don't forget one other word that's heavily tied to the Moor thing. Mortgage.
Ah.
Yes, you will pay until your death. Mort.
Wow.
Got you on that one, didn't I? I'm serious, though. That's what that's all about.
Yeah. Another random note, Magnetic Peak, which we went to film in 2004 because they were having Black Panther sightings there. This is in Hawaii.
Are we talking about the militant group or the actual four-legged animals?
Well, you know, when I was there, here's another little funny story. When I was there, I kept joking about there being an underwater Black Panther that might come out of the water. Total joke. I had no basis for it whatsoever, but I've since found 2 or 3 other references to there actually being a belief in an underwater jaguar that's supernatural. And then there was actually a sighting of it not too long ago where somebody saw it running across the water. They were on the beach, and a bunch of people saw this glowing jaguar running on top of the water all the way, across the horizon. But anyway, at Magnetic Peak there, they also the location of, not only does it have Black Panthers, but it has the biggest digital camera in the world, and it's located at the NSA, NASA, and I think SAIC, the defense contractor, have facilities on top of it. And they're now looking for asteroids coming our way. They're using this largest digital camera to look for asteroids. It makes you wonder, you know, if we do have a fake asteroid scare, because it seems like they're leading up to something like it's either going to be a fake return of Christ or a fake Ezekiel's wheel return or an asteroid coming down. It's going to be, or aliens invading. It's going to be something like that. That's going to draw, you know, or global warming even, you know, to bring the world together so that they can have a world government. And then, so, you know, if they happen to do an asteroid coming our way as the means, that, you know, it would involve this peak where these creature entities are seen.
Well, we've seen that in the movies also with, what was that Bruce Willis movie? Asteroid. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, just got a couple more items. There's an X-Men episode I saw recently. In the episode, there's an impervious metal coating that's developed by mutants near Point Pleasant. They actually show a map of the tri-state area in the cartoon. And that's where this secret thing is developed. And this is an older cartoon, 20 years old. So somewhere in New York, these cartoonists, got the idea that Point Pleasant is an area where secret things are developed, which kind of ties into my whole, it sort of these things, this knowledge sort of leaks out in different ways.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you don't think that's a wild guess, do you?
Well, interestingly, these mutants use this weapon, this metal, to attack the X-Men compound. And you know where the X-Men compound was shown on the map to be?
West Virginia.
Iron Mountain, New York.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh man! And what issue? What issue is this?
I don't know what issue. It was a cartoon.
It was. Oh, I mean, it wasn't the X-Men cartoon. It was a movie, right?
No, it was one of their older cartoons. They had an actual series of cartoons on TV.
All right, I missed them. I didn't pay attention. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, also down there in Ashland, which is near Point Pleasant, you have, I didn't really know this before, but Marathon Oil has a major facility there. And Marathon keeps coming up at these. In fact, that Pharma gas station with the blue orb was a Marathon station, I believe. And then yesterday we noticed that at this site where the faceless shadow person was being seen, and the Indian Mound was at, there was also a Marathon station there. But that's a Rockefeller-owned company, and there's also in Ashland you have something called AK Steel, which used to be Armco Steel, which has its headquarters in northern Cincinnati. Probably in Ashland, the big players in Ashland are AK Steel, Marathon, and then Solvay, which we talked about, Paul worked at over in Germany, or Poland, I'm sorry. So, do I have any more items here? Oh yeah, the Nazis worship the black sun. S-U-N or S-O-N, actually. Okay, so another way to read the SS on their logo is that it's the black sun, the Schwarze Sonne, which can be interpreted as black sun, meaning here you have Nazis worshiping the black sun, which is kind of like Jesus, right? If Jesus was black, but it's a black Jesus in a way. So I think this is, at some level, what it sort of may say is that the Nazis knew that there is a Moorish underpinning to everything. We do seem to have migrated out of northern Africa. The Europeans did, and so I think the Nazis knew this, and that's why they worked so hard at, propagating the opposite idea. It only shows up in the symbology. It doesn't show up in, in their actual, beliefs, I guess, or outward beliefs. In the inner circle, they did know this, and they had that secret Vril Society, VRIL,
right,
which essentially worshiped the Black Virgin, which is at the center of the earth. This Virgin who,
the Black Madonna,
can emanate out of the earth, and that's where you would see the Black Virgin sighting. The Black Virgin Mary. And it reminded me of this theory, which I don't know if you mentioned this or someone else did, but that the Catholics invented a competing religion, Islam, in order to increase, in order to have someone to sort of to have sort of like terrorism. They had to have somebody that they could say was their enemy who was causing problems to get more funding, to get people to donate more money. You have to have an outside enemy. And then they could also blame things on this enemy too. Anything, was it you that talked about this?
Well, we haven't, from time to time. And I know we're not going to go into it now, and this will only enrage half the world. But yeah, it would seem that the papacy definitely abetted Islam, and the idea was you do what you want to do, but don't harm the hair of a Catholic. But there eventually came a time, apparently, especially in the 16th century, where the papacy got a little bit concerned about the spread of Islam, and hence you had the war that, I guess, culminated in the sea battle of Lepanto, a major sea battle where the Ottoman Empire's extension of this were defeated. So, there is, and of course, Fatima. What is that? Fatima is the name of, I believe, Muhammad's daughter. So go figure that out. And
really?
There also seems to be, as certain researchers have shown, symbolically, some kind of connection between Romanism and Islam.
Well, I noticed that also when I was in downtown Cincinnati yesterday, right across from the the main building for the administration of the city, name escapes me, anyway, like the City Hall, I guess. City Hall. right across from City Hall is the Jewish church, the big temple, and it actually has Islamic-looking spires. I mean, it's completely. I mean, you just look at it, you're like, wow, that looks just like a mosque. Anyway.
Sure. Well, let's remember, too, that these are people from a certain region and that their similarities cannot be or should not be overlooked, despite whatever we now understand as, disparate problems or whatever.
Yeah, it's all very hard to sift out and decide, what grew out of what, But, I mean, obviously the Hebrew religion is much older, or seems to be, but, I mean, do you think that Christianity grew out of Judaism and then it sort of propagated Islam, or do you have a theory about that?
Yeah, I do, but honestly, if I started, I'd have to be very careful about the words I chose, and it would take some time.
Okay. Well, let's just skip that, and let's talk to Dave Scott here of Passing Lane Investigation. And before I hand it over, I don't know if I'm going to come back to you or not, but the new book, The Mothman Photographer 3, is out now, so it's on Amazon, and if anyone wants to order it, it's there.
All right, I tell you what, put Dave on and let him shoot it back to you, and then we'll close off.
Okay. Here's Dave.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Okay. What is, do you have a website, Passing Lane?
Yeah, I do. It's called Passing Lane Paranormal Investigations.
Okay.
You could find it if you just Googled Dave Scott Passing Lane or Passing Lane Paranormal Investigations.
Okay.
But anyway, I started this site as sort of a sideline to ghost hunting, which I do quite a bit. And I realized that there are so many urban legends in this area. And over the years, I've grown up with a lot of these legends. And over the years, people have added to them so much that there are just literally dozens of urban legends around here of ghostly sightings and strange things. So I decided to stick to the ghosts and haunted bridges, haunted roads, and investigate some of these and try to dig up the facts, as much truth as I could, to find out what was really behind the legends. And that's been a lot of fun. I've been doing that for a few years now.
Are you doing it? Is this something that's regional to where you are, or is this nationwide, or is this global, or what?
No, I found that there's so much locally that I've just stuck to Ohio so far. Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky. Right here in Cincinnati, it's sort of on the corner. I'm just a few miles from Indiana and very close to Kentucky. So, sort of in a tri-state area here, I can cover a lot of ground. So I found that a lot of these legends over the years have, I can't find, the beginning of the legends, the source. Oh, this one road, Buffalo Ridge. There are so many legends connected to this one area. Supposedly, people have seen white vans or black vans chase them from the area. There were rumors of an old crematorium that was in the woods back off of Buffalo Ridge. I found out it was actually an observatory that was built back in the 30s, or about 1930, about the time of the Depression. And they never finished. They had just finished the basement area and sort of one line of building blocks. And since they never finished it over the years, since 1930, people have wondered what it was, and these rumors have built up around it. People have thought it was an old crematorium, and they said, Satanists have used the area for rites and things like that. And there's rumors of ghostly cars seen along the road, and screams, and headless bride. You name it. Buffalo Ridge seems to have. Oh, it's also the playground of Charlie Manson. He used to play back there as a kid, they say. But
are there any real homicides or whatever or just tragic deaths upon which a lot of this is based?
There have been some deaths on Buffalo Ridge, but it's mostly from thrill-riding kids. They do ridge hopping, they call it, where Buffalo Ridge is like a roller coaster, and the kids will just go flying up and down the road, hopping these ridges, and occasionally one of them will go off course and hit a tree. So there have been a few deaths in that regard, but I don't think there's been anything mysterious happen there, really. Anything paranormal. I'm still digging.
Well, I'm just wondering if a paranormal situation would arise from a very real, like I said, tragic murder or event.
It could be that these other things have grown up around those deaths. That could be. Andy wanted me to tell you about my sister's home.
Okay.
Okay. She told me that a while back, was it last August? Last August, she was sitting on her front porch and saw this form come down just out of the sky and just cover the area in front of the house and across the street. And it was like a black, shady form, and it was followed by 2 or 3 others. And it just swooped down, totally blocked the view. It was like a black, shadowy shape, and then it just came back up into the sky, returned to the sky, and she didn't know what that was, but she said the first thing she thought of was Mothman.
Huh.
It was.
Let me ask you something too, Dave, if I could. I'm just going to throw this out, all right?
Okay.
And anything that you've come across, anything you've heard in and around that geographic area, yourself or whatever, folklore, has anybody ever spoke about what we would call starbursts, light bursts, from no particular source? I know this is really vague, but either you've heard it or you haven't.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Unless you count like ghost lights and things like that.
Probably in that area. And there's a reason why that's been brought to mind, but I just wanted to know. I'm just throwing that out because we had episodes where I lived, and because of what you do. And by the way, I pulled up your spot on the site. Is that foldingtimber.net?
Right, and it's /passing.
Passing, yeah. Okay, that's pretty cool. Reminds you of A Night of the Living Dead. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Skeleton Man. Okay, anyone wanted me to tell you about some other things that happened at my sister's house? It's haunted. I can tell you that much. We've been over there many times, but she's seen. She set up monitors in the basement, video monitors, because so much has happened. And her niece's little girl saw this thing on the monitor one time. She says, "Look, Ma, there's a skeleton." And they looked at the monitor, and it looked like a human being. I mean, a solid human being coming up the steps, but it was sort of frozen in place, holding on to the rail.
Right.
So my sister went down the steps. It was daytime. They looked around and looked up and down the steps, and there wasn't actually a person there, but just this image frozen on the monitor. And they've had a lot of things like we've gotten a lot of strange EVPs. They've heard sounds like their cupboards opening and closing at night.
Now, was something supposed to have happened there? I mean, is there something? I mean, because I've talked to this with Andy about actually. I don't know if it was his sister's place. Was that it, or?
Yeah, it actually belongs to her mother-in-law. So, and it's been in the family since they bought it back in the 50s. So no one's died there. Nothing like that. Nothing mysterious about the neighborhood as far as I can tell, but other people in the neighborhood have reported strange happenings at their house too. So like the next door neighbor has admitted to seeing things. So I think it's the whole neighborhood.
Well, yeah, and then that would lead me to ask you, like, was there anything that even dates back to, you always look for a disturbance, in a sense of, even I think Andy would talk about one of the properties in Seattle that has some strange occurrences due to something that occurred before.
Right.
Is there any history in the area? I mean, whether it's a burial ground, a cemetery, an event, or anything like that would lead you to think causally that what's going on now is based on something that took place a long time ago?
I've dug into the history of the neighborhood and really can't find anything. It was just settled back in the 1800s. It's not that old, and I don't believe it was. I don't think there were any Indian settlements on the area or any mounds around the area. It isn't close to any large bodies of water or anything like that. Haven't really found any reason for the place to be, charged or spiritually connected to anything. And
you don't think it's any kind of government / scientific / experiment?
Oh, that I don't know. I know police helicopters fly over every weekend, but I think that has more to do with drugs than
yeah. There you go. That's right. Yep, you're right.
I don't think there's any government involvement, but you never know.
You never know.
Never know these days. Do you want to talk to Andy again in a second?
It's up to you, Dave. I mean, shoot what you got and then kick it back to Andy. Sure.
Okay, I'll let Andy wrap it up for you then.
All right, Dave. Thanks a lot. And again, it's passingtimber.net /passing. I mean, sorry, fallingtimber.net /passing.
Right.
And that'll get you there.
Okay, thanks.
All right, no problem, Dave. Good talking to you.
Hey, Biz.
Yeah, and on there is the list of all, I guess, a lot of the sites that you've been speaking about as well, with this legacy of strange occurrences like Buell Road and Hangman's Hollow, Hamel House Inn, and such. So that's kind of an interesting read. And Andy, again, Mothman 3 is out, right? How long has it been out for? Since what? About Christmas?
Yes.
All right. Is that Amazon only that they can purchase that off of?
Say that again?
Is that Amazon only that they can purchase the book from, or can they purchase it from your website, andycolvin.com?
Yeah, they can. Well, we need to put a link up there, but yeah, it'll be up there real soon.
All right, good enough. No problem.
Yeah. But I wanted to just mention about Dave's sister's place. One of the things that happened with the neighbor was the neighbor's house, all the windows blew out unexpectedly for no reason. The next door neighbor. And this happened in front of my house in Seattle. My friend came over and his car windows blew out for no reason last year. Anyway, I think the point with Dave's family is that it follows them. It seems to follow not only her, but her husband, because he was telling me that he had some things happen in his grandparents' house, right? Tony? That is the same house. Oh, okay. Like after the grandparents died in that house, they heard flute playing, violin and flute music playing from nowhere that they could find. But anyway, I was sort of because I remember they were. I was talking to Tony, the husband of Dave's wife, and he was sort of saying that it had followed them. It had been with them before they even moved into that house. That when they had lived in an apartment before, they had the stove had gone on and off by itself. Something was turning the fire off and on the gas stove, and lots of things like that. So it seems like wherever they go, it may follow them. But Dave showed me a film that he shot in the basement. Was that at a different location? The Ghost Girl?
That was another part.
Right. Like, for instance, at a previous apartment that they lived at, Dave's really good with setting up cameras remotely so they can monitor them from another place in the house. And he's got all kinds of gadgets. He even was going to have a car at one time that was all outfitted with some of this stuff. He didn't actually do that because he had been driving on this road and everything, all the power had gone out. He wanted to have a vehicle that would be like a paranormal, a rolling Faraday cage that would not be that would be immune to any sort of EMFs or ghost energies.
Yeah.
But he still has all this equipment around, even though he hasn't installed it on the car. motion detectors and things that you can set up. And so you'll see all that stuff if you go to a site. But he did film this image of a girl. I mean, it's as clear as a bell. You can see her face, and it's a ghost. And you don't normally see such good footage of these things. But he's had some other things happen where, like John Keel, they get weird phone calls where there's a ghost talking to them on the phone, but only certain people can hear it at a certain time. So one person can pick it up, hear it, hand it to the other person can't hear it. It's almost like whatever this phenomenon is, it taps into each person's brainwave, particularly, and that's sort of how these, vocal hallucinations, I guess you could call them, occur. They're not really hallucinations, I don't think, but they're triggered by something in the environment that's doing it. But Keel talked about that as well, and that's, a common kind of thing that you find. Yeah, that's about it for me. Anything else you want to bring up?
No, I just want you to know that not shying away from that topic about Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, that's a fascinating thing, but boy, is it elaborate as you can understand, and nobody reacts to that unemotionally. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes I forget, just everybody's got their reality tunnel, and if you step outside of that, and try to look for alternate explanations, even if there's evidence for the alternate explanation, people just can't go there.
Well, even what you spoke to about the black sun and a black Christ, that I'd have to take a look at that also. As far as I know, Jesus was from a Semitic people, and that could make him very swarthy, no doubt about it. But I'm not protective of that at all. Who knows? But the black sun, as it pertains to what the Nazis were doing, that's really interesting. And we're talking about black SON along with the black SUN, and boy, that also leads to just a number of speculations and investigations. So, that might be something we want to look at down the road. But no, I had not known that prior, and find that very interesting. And let me just say one thing also. Did you ever hear of the account?
Go ahead.
About when they went into the Berlin bunker. I particularly don't think they found Hitler there. They found somebody who, they called Hitler. But did you realize that they found, dozens of Buddhist monks that were killed in that incursion?
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Okay, we did. All right. I didn't know if we had. And that's why, as I get Alzheimer's, it's good that you keep reminding me that we already did this. Why am I laughing at that? Okay. So anyway, that when you get back home also, it'll be interesting to talk about that. But you know what I find also, before you go, interesting is there something with female personages? Your sister's place, remember we talked to her once?
Yeah.
And Dave's sister's place. And I don't remember what properties in Seattle. Was that your place or whatever that also kind of had a little history?
Yeah, uh-huh.
But, it could be a coincidence. We're only talking about two episodes or two instances where you have Dave's sister, your sister. But I'm just wondering, is there something to do with the female that makes it more inclined, a habitat to be more inclined for visitation?
Well, not according to Keel. He was sort of felt like men, ex-Catholic men, were the most likely to have a paranormal experience, followed by menstruating teachers, female teachers who were teaching gifted children and who drove Ford Galaxies.
I love it. Well, but are not females somewhat equated with being sensitives more so than men?
No, actually men have been found in lab experiments to be slightly more psychic.
Wow, okay. All right.
And I think that may have something to do. The Buddhists sort of feel like women are actually more grounded because of their role, as having children, which is a very magical thing. And I think for a man, it's really hard to understand what that must be like.
What, childbirth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
women would probably not use the word magical as an adjective or an adverb.
Well, I think, not when they're having it, but I think later when they think about what it's like to make a new human being, they do realize how magical it is. And I think what happens is women, by virtue of that, are more grounded to the earth, sort of. That's a very basic process that has to happen for life to continue. And it also, the earth is seen as the mother, and the Black Virgin is what is the energy coming from the earth that's, manifesting in human. So I think, especially in Buddhism, men are seen as air creatures.
Yeah.
They're more flighty. They're flying. They don't have that grounding. They're not. Anyway, it's just that slight difference.
But Andrew, that's not far flung, because think about just with pollination among plants. It's the female that's more or less nailed to the ground, if you will, and it's the pollen and the impregnating material that floats through the air. Yeah. That kind of always looked like that way, to me, and so anyway. Botany 101, according to Andrew Colvin. All right. Are we at road's end here?
I think so.
All right. I guess when next we'll speak, you'll be back, and there's some other topics that we were going to get to. And Manson, of course, is one of those in the forefront. I think someone wanted to ask me about 911. Was that Valentini? Yeah, it was John. Yeah. Do you want to do that now?
Well, there's not a whole lot to say other than in 1967, I had a friend who said that Mothman had told him to stand in a certain spot and he could see the future, and he stood in that spot and he saw, an event that looked a lot like 911. And then when I stood in the spot, I saw it too. And we weren't friends much longer after that because I just couldn't, it was too freaky.
You both got spooked off it, right?
And I think you were saying that the towers were being developed at that time, right?
Yeah. They began in 66 is the latest. And I might even be wrong about that. It might even be earlier. But I do remember, and I'll just say this, that when I went to high school my sophomore year, was on the Palisades edge. I think you were familiar with that, the Jersey structures across right from Manhattan. And I know that in fall of 66, I would say they were somewhat more than halfway built. So go figure. Yes. By 67, they were moving. And they were there. There's no doubt about it. They were completed in 70, apparently. But, did you guys see the towers?
I saw the domed one get hit, so it was different. I didn't see it as it happened on TV. No, it was different.
Dome?
But it was New York. He had said it's New York. It's 2001, and I do remember tops of buildings blowing up. But I just remember that domed building that's still there, I think.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. So something changed about it. It wasn't exactly, it was like some alteration occurred, but it still happened,
All right.
But I will just add. Are you done?
No, just clear me up, okay? How did the Mothman figure into this?
Well, Tommy was saying that Mothman he was saying that Mothman in league with the aliens, and that these aliens were like little men, little furry men. They weren't, I'm trying to remember now. But he also, it was, the description he gave of the aliens wasn't all that clear to me.
Okay.
Other than, and I don't know if this, I think they were separate from the little furry things, but the little furry things are what I felt like had visited us that one night that I stayed over his place. And I had this dream of these little furry men, and then he woke up screaming that they had visited. But he also had another event where he claimed a flying saucer had landed in his yard. And and that those beings, there was like a humanoid characteristic to them. They were more humanoid. So, and Harriet probably can remember more about that particular thing because he told her, he may have told her more about that UFO landing. I don't remember that much about it. I remember the marks in the yard looked like something had landed.
And how did he know to stand in that place?
Say that again?
How did your friend know to stand in that spot?
He said that, I don't know. I don't remember if what I remember is that he said they told him to stand there.
Who's they?
The aliens and Mothman or something.
All right,
some conglomeration. He spoke of them together like they were the same,
Do you find that necessarily accurate? That Mothman would be involved per se with the aliens?
Well, I may be going too far by saying that he thought they were the same. I'm not sure that
Okay.
I know that he spoke to them. He spoke to them in the same breath. Let's put it that way. And I would say, he definitely said that it was the aliens who had foretold his life, that he knew all of what was going to happen in his life. And that's why I would say more so that he would say that the aliens probably gave him that vision of the towers. But he was also seeing Mothman, saying that Mothman was coming and staying outside of his, like hanging in the trees there outside of his window. So I don't know. It's kind of like splitting hairs in a way.
Okay.
He was sort of seeing all three. Actually, he didn't mention small furry creatures. That's more or less what I feel like was in the room, if there was anything in the room. He was more or less locked into the space aliens, which were more humanoid, and Mothman.
And how long in time was was there between both what he saw and you saw?
Well, that's a good question. I think he either saw it earlier that day or the previous day.
All right, but it's that close in time, though.
Yeah.
Now,
and we went back there. I went back there last October and stood in the same spot, and I didn't get any feeling like it was active anymore, or that you could still see the future there.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you this, and again, if it's a yes answer, it's for another time to talk about. Do you think that might have been a portal for a particular time, and that time only?
Well, I think that particular spot, yes.
Yes.
It could be that there's another spot there now. I don't know. Because, again, in 2002, there was something going on there, whatever. And I don't know if it takes 2 or 3 people to activate it. But when Harriet and Sharon and I were there, we definitely were, it was there. So something was there. I don't know if it was and it did have a sort of a prophetic feel about it, in that I was sensing some drownings incidents that led us down this path of investigating a drowning that had occurred at Harriet's house, one of the renters, and then a drowning occurred 3 days after we were at the site in the river there that I actually saw. So.
All right, and lastly, Andy, and we'll pick up. Thanks to the time, you and Dave. The one thing I remember too is that this is very much a hoax. I don't know why they would have done this, but do you remember the photo, which was doctored, that came out right after 9/11, that showed a winged creature coming in for what would probably be the east toward the towers, or what was the towers?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Now, to me, that's a really bad joke. And yet, since we've spoken, I don't know if somebody did that to more or less evoke some kind of God's hand by sending an angel down. But then again, you look at it, and it's almost like a Mothman thing, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, it could be that it was meant to discredit, like we were saying earlier.
Yeah.
To discredit the whole idea that people even had prophecies from Mothman about 911.
Okay, yeah. I've been thinking about that a while from when we last spoke, because I do remember that, and I just thought that was like bad taste, no matter what was going on there. But I didn't mean to bring that up to you. So anyway, and if I had before, again, like I said, it's because of my degenerating cerebral state. So,
something else I wanted to mention was that
sure.
there was an event here a year or two ago when I feel like I sort of may have cracked the whole thing about APOL, the MIB who was communicating with John Keel. Or maybe I didn't really crack it, but we have some more information about it. You mentioned the Palisades a minute ago.
Right.
There's something in Seattle called the Palisades, and it's these arches that are found at the Seattle Science Center. Is that what it's called? The Science Museum. And these were designed by, guess who? The same architect that designed the Twin Towers. And that's the Japanese architect.
Yeah, right,
okay?
right. The buildings, yeah.
Yeah, they were built for the World Trade, for the World's Fair in Seattle, 1962, 63. Anyway, and it was at the Science Center there, underneath the Palisades, where I saw this display of how they developed the cell phone, which using inverted opals to develop it, the chip that's used in cell phones. And when you invert the vowels in opal, you get APOL. And it made me, and then I started researching cell phones, and I found that they were developed in Cleveland by Rockefeller scientists and had been held back for many, many decades by the Rockefellers for monetary reasons. So there's a conspiracy there. There's a conspiracy around cell phones, and it ties to. And I also had a witness who knew some industrialists here in Seattle, Cincinnati, who were using cell phones in the 60s.
Yeah.
So I think you had a secret distribution of cell phones way before, the rest of us got them, and that this would account for how people were able to follow Keel around and harass him, basically. And the cell phone was originally a military radio. So it kind of points toward military-industrial accomplices, conspirators, who were sort of trying to. It's either military-industrial conspirators who were harassing Keel, or it's the phenomenon mimicking that as a way to sort of point in that direction.
And I was just taking a look
towards cell phone, Rockefeller cell phone technology.
The only thing about the cell phone technology, and that is, of course, the problem is what towers were they using, to help expand the coverage? You know what I mean?
Well, they were using satellites. And
all right, okay, that would do it. You're right. Okay, you said that.
Yeah, and the satellites were being deployed then. They were already deployed, and I think their goal was to finish deploying them all by January of '68. So, they.
Oh, by the way, that architect is Yamasaki.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound right? Yeah, Yamasaki.
Did you ever find out who supplied the steel for the towers? Did that question ever get answered?
Shoot, oh man, I did, and it happened right after. If I'm speaking off the microphone a little bit, because yes, I did, and and that company was one of them. It actually was the main one. Do you remember which one you mentioned?
When?
When we talked about the steel, you were right.
Buckeye?
Yes.
No way.
Oh man. Okay, look. Oh, this is freaking me out. Okay, I had found it, and I don't know what I did with the source, but yes, I have it. Oh man, I'll tell you what. All right, I had to refresh my memory, and we just paused there for a second. But Buckeye wasn't involved. Who was involved apparently was Dreer Steel of Long Island, Pittsburgh, Des Moines, Pacific Car and Foundry in Seattle, Laclede Steel in St. Louis, and nearby Granite Steel, and Montague Betts in Lynchburg, Virginia, Moshe Steel in Houston, Stanray Pacific in Los Angeles, and Levinson Steel in Pittsburgh all had a nice little piece of the job. It seemed that an entire nation had been mobilized to build the World Trade Center. That comes from the book City in the Sky, The Rise and Fall of the Trade Center by James Glantz and Eric Lipton, both of whom are reporters for the New York Times. And Glantz was also involved in one of the documentaries, I think it was Why the Towers Fell, or The Center of the World. I think it might have been The Center of the World. So, Andy, it wasn't Buckeye. You know, it just rang a bell, but when I had to grab the source, and in fact, it wasn't Buckeye, but those were the apparent principles in the steel supply for the building.
It makes you wonder, though, if you've got that many people making steel for that one project, who was overseeing that?
I know.
You know, was it? What, did they just have an architect looking, overseeing the steel production, or did they have another steel company whose name has gone unnamed, who was overseeing that? You know, it makes you wonder.
Who knows? And I agree. There was a lot of hands in the pie. And, of course, we've heard theories about the towers. One of them one of them were aired on the show with a gentleman I've not heard from in some time, who said he was an architectural photographer and supposedly was privy to the fact that the towers were having problems because of their size and their constant resistance to wind currents, etc. Not this whole bit about the weakening of the steel, but that in fact the buildings might have been levering, if you will, somewhere around the 11th floor. You know what I'm saying? That they were being shook enough that they were having problems, and that those things might go down one day, or you can bring them down for a certain purpose. And that's way, way out there, I know, but who knows? I mean, it was Rockefeller's wish that they went up, and I'm sure it was his wish they went down, because certainly they weren't the victims of 19 Arab hijackers, or at least how many of them were supposed to be on those two planes. That's garbage. So anyway, there you have it.
That would explain all the extra steel that was at the bottom.
In what sense?
What?
What do you mean that would explain all the steel that was at the bottom? You mean...
I'm sorry, to explain all the bombs that were at the bottom of the building that were going off intermittently after before, right as the planes hit, some bombs went off in the basement. Well, because they would have had to put extra steel, around that 11th floor and above that, probably up to 20 or whatever. And that would have necessitated more bombs in the lower part.
You had to knock it off its foundation. And, of course, there's that one construction worker, oh, boy, whose name I have forgotten.
They needed it to come down they needed it to get cleaned up as fast as possible before people could ask questions and they could just cart the stuff off to China or wherever. So that would have, because you'd think, well, if it's going to lever at the 11th floor, why didn't they just blow it up to the 11th floor, not worry about the lower part as much? And just, and that would be, then they wouldn't have bombs going off on the bottom, which is an obvious sign that they were, that's the giveaway, when you've got people being blown, people were sent to the hospital in the basement by bombs, and these people have been interviewed. So they could have gotten around that just by blowing it up down to the 12th floor, right?
Well, what I'm looking at...
But that would have stimulated people to want to rebuild them, which they don't want to do for some reason. They didn't want to rebuild them. I don't know whose idea that is, but...
All right, the individual's name is Philip Morelli. He was a WTC construction worker, and he gave a reasonable interview. I'm not talking about an hour or something like that, but he gave a clear description to network media about what had happened, and that he was blown about what he called their shanty where they dressed for the day's work, which was below ground, and that he heard a number of explosions, and one of them sent him like from one side of the room to the other, And so here you got somebody talking about explosions, and this obviously was either simultaneous, probably was simultaneous to the first hit. So, blowing the bases of the towers off is important if you want the thing to all come down in one spot. You don't need something. Go ahead.
Oh, I see. So you're okay. Well, but the weird thing is that it blew up. They blew it up from the top down, which is unusual, right? And if they're going to blow it up from the top down, why didn't they just stop at the 12th floor and not worry about the bottom?
All right. Again, this is another thing that takes a long, long time, to make sure you got it all straight. Otherwise, the criticisms, rightfully so, come from all over the place. But I think the reason why the whole thing had to be decimated, including floors 11 and below, and this is given at the fact that this gentleman had accurate information, and that is, and this is my contention to a certain extent, they were trying to sell the idea that the whole building melted. All right, this is all a result of fire, which it was not. They could not leave, I don't think, anything standing so that people could look at it and say, well, why didn't this melt? In other words, blow the whole thing, atomize it, vaporize it, whatever, drop it to the ground. Don't leave anything that is identifiable where people can at least on face say, well, this doesn't look like the result of something being melted. That's the reason why I think that they had to blow the whole thing, every stick, right to the ground. And they did so.
See.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I see, right? That's my point of view, but I think that's somewhat substantiated. Otherwise, hey, look, the people who worked on that, a lot of personnel that worked on that know that thing didn't melt. If for whatever reason, they were not going to talk or not going to get into that. But, yeah, truthfully, Andy, I mean, they couldn't leave anything. And if one of the first charges were from below, I mean, take a look at a detonation of any building. Some people are saying, well, this isn't like that. It is like that to a certain extent. What they use might be different. That might have been a first ever. And certainly, the companies that are going around doing that kind of thing probably don't have that kind of material with them. But,
well, it also go ahead.
No, in other words, the first explosions apparently took place down below. And then what you see, as you would see in any kind of casino demolition, you'll see cutter charges starting to go down the building. And, of course, the building follows imploding it. But you'll see those cutter charges go off. They went off at the WTC, but you'll never see that kind of video again because of the obvious reasons,
But it gets back again to my idea about the C4.
Yes. Yeah,
being made by these Rockefeller companies. I mean, these are the guys that make the stuff to do this kind of work. So they built the towers. They control the steel that goes in the towers. They control the C4 that brings them down, thermite. And it's all, again, that sealed system we've talked about, where they can do these kinds of things because the system's so sealed. And, they make mention of the fact with C4 how heavily regulated and controlled the movement of C4 is. If the chemical companies make it, you can't buy it unless you're totally, locked into the whatever system they've got going for distributing it. You just can't buy it. You have to have various, licenses and
for obvious
the military
reasons, sure.
and the CIA and all these military intelligence agencies are regulating it. So for it to get in the hands of terrorists, and are they really blowing up everything in Iraq using dynamite? I doubt it.
Right. Yep.
They're using C4. All the terrorists around the world are using it, so they're getting it from somewhere, and these companies have to know how it's getting there.
Well, this goes back to the 93 attempted bombing. Well, they did it, but it didn't bring the towers down. With that cell in Jersey City and what they were using, they weren't using whatever was used that day in the towers. But I mean, I think your point above all this is which is most important and correct, and that is the whole system, from the building of to the taking down of, yes, could have been overseen by a cabal without a doubt. And that's one of the things that's intimated by some reporter from those days who said that really there was a great resistance to the building of the trade towers, but as he intimated, it was the wishes of a certain amount of people, and Rockefeller was one of them. And if they wanted to get it done, they had the power to get it done. And I believe at the time the governor was who? Nelson Rockefeller. So you're right. It is a closed system, and they could have seen it from beginning to end. No doubt about it.
All righty.
All right, listen. Hey, stay with me for a second, folks. This has been one of our free-form interviews with Andrew Colvin. The website is andycolvin.com. Mothman 3 is out for sale. We also want to say thanks to Dave Scott, and I'll have his website up on the with the audio as well as I have yours up. And you can buy the book obviously from Amazon. And Andy, let me just clear this up. You said they can buy it off your site. Is that true? Is that a link to Amazon, or can they buy it through you?
Well, by the time I will make an effort here to get it up there. I just haven't gotten it onto my site. I do have the second book and the first book on my site, and I do plan to have the third one up there as soon as possible. So.
All right. Hang right there for a second, Andy, if you will. Folks, you've been listening to Beyond the Grassy Knoll with Andy Colvin and Dave Scott. Thank you for being with us.
For 7 years, 37-year-old Philip Morelli was a construction worker inside the Trade Center. At 8:30, he says he was headed to level B4 in Tower 1, 4 stories below ground.
I go downstairs, the foreman tells me to go to remove the containers. As I'm walking by the main freight corridor building in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion, of whatever happened, it threw me to the floor. And that's when everything started happening. Knocked me right to the floor. You didn't know what it was. Of course, you're assuming something just fell over in the loading dock, something very heavy, something very big. You don't know what happened. And all of a sudden, you just felt the floor moving, and you get up, and the walls. And then, now I'm hearing that the main freight car, the elevators, fell down. So I was right near the main freight car, so I assumed what that was. Then, you heard that coming towards you. I was racing. I was going towards the bathroom. All of a sudden, I opened the door. I didn't know it was a bathroom. And all of a sudden, a big impact happened again. And all the ceiling tile was falling down. The light fixtures were falling, swinging out of the ceiling. And I come running out the door, and everything, the walls were down. And now I started running towards the parking lots.
Nearly 100 floors below where the first plane hit, Phil felt the devastating impact. But 4 levels below ground, he had no idea terrorists had done it on purpose. What did you think was going on?
I just thought something, because I know that the loading dock is on B1, that's 3 floors above me. I just assumed that a car or something exploded on B1, or something got delivered and something big and heavy fell over. You just knew it was something big, because I can't even imagine living in San Francisco or earthquakes, but when the floor is moving underneath you and everything is just happening and smoke and people screaming, then I never knew until when I got outside the building and I was running down the west side. That was the only time I ever heard about planes hitting the building.
But before he got out of the building, he faced obstacles underground.
As I ran into the parking lots, everybody's screaming. I actually helped somebody get to a staircase that had a broken leg. There was a lot of smoke down there. There was a lot of people screaming. People came with us running up the ramps. We wanted to get help for the people that couldn't move down there. And as we were running up the ramps, and, it's not like a regular mall that you're going straight up. You have to go, you got to go clear across the whole from 1 to 2 World Trade Center. That's the way you got to run. And then all of a sudden, it happened all over again. Building 2 get hit. And then, I don't know that. I just know something else hit us to the floor. Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in. Everything that was going on. I know people that got killed in the basement. I know people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face. And I know I love seeing everybody every day that survived it and was there. And I just hear everybody's story. And it was terrible. No matter where you were in that building, there was no safe place to be except to get out, help as many people as you can, and just try to get out, because there was devastation everywhere.
The feelings are emotional, not intellectual. Maybe the big picture wasn't analyzed. The feelings are emotional, not intellectual. The big picture wasn't analyzed. Take a look at this flight. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about this flight.
This is certainly something the air traffic control folks would have seen. They would have seen these things.
Clearly. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about this flight. Both of them made extreme and noticeable deviations and were heading in the wrong direction for 30, perhaps 40 minutes, thus clearly giving air traffic controllers quite a bit of attention.
This is certainly something the air traffic control folks would have seen. They would have seen these things.
Clearly. Heading in the wrong direction for 30, perhaps 40 minutes. And the fact that two planes were doing this must have seemed odd. 30, perhaps 40 minutes. And the fact that two planes were doing this must have seemed odd.
Questions today about the whereabouts of some of the top people in government in the United States. Questions today about government in the United States.
That's why they need truth.
Questions today about the whereabouts of some of the top people in government in the United States. The president's been flying around the country. The vice president's been out of sight. Mr. Rumsfeld has also been out of sight. President's been out of sight. President's been out of sight. Mr. Rumsfeld has also been out of sight. Questions today about government in the United States. Questions today about government in the United States.
And we are told the president will address the nation at some point tonight. We do not know at what time. Started his day in Sarasota, Florida, then went to Shreveport, a military base outside Shreveport, then went to Nebraska, where the Strategic Air Command is located, and now he is making his way back to Washington. That's why they need truth. The president is en route back to Washington, we are now told. Now he is making his way back to Washington. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about... heading in the wrong direction for 30, perhaps 40 minutes.
This is certainly something the air traffic control folks would have seen. They would have seen these things.
Clearly. Heading in the wrong direction for 30, perhaps 40 minutes.
This is certainly something the air traffic control folks would have seen. They would have seen these things.
Clearly. Take a look at this flight. This flight. This flight. Take a look at this flight. This flight. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about this flight.
The feelings are emotional, not intellectual. Most people will try to drive this up into the head, but this is an emotional issue. Everyone sitting at this desk, I'm sure, is emotional. All the people we're talking to are emotional, and so are the children. If we try to make it a head thing rather than a heart thing, we miss the point.